Hi, I'm Jam Galang from ARBC 102 speaking, and in this presentation, I'll be talking about the theory of modernism in architecture. To start off, here's an overview of my presentation. First, I'll be talking about the background and history of modernism. Second, I'll be discussing about the characteristics of modern architecture. Third, I'll be talking about the different elements that make up modern architecture. Fourth, I'll be naming a few prominent modernist architects. Fifth, I'll be showing and discussing some of the well-known structures that were made during modern architecture period. Modernism. Modernism, from the term modern, means relating to the present or the contemporary, meaning something of the period in which we are speaking. Modernism, according from what I research, is an architectural style that refers to a large group of similar buildings that emerged in many countries by the practice of many architects between the 1920s and 1950s. It is an architectural movement that embraced principled design based on minimalism, brutalism, internationalism, expressionism, and the use of relatively new industrial materials. It is also a type of architecture that first took off in Europe and then made its way to the American style. Modernism is also a response to accelerated industrialization and social changes. It is also a period of utilization of new materials and advanced technology, and rejection of old, traditional, historical ideas, styles, and ornamentation. Aside from the years I mentioned earlier, modernism also covers 19th century and 20th century as well. History. Modern architecture emerged at the end of the 19th century, basically due to the revolutions in technology, engineering, and building materials, and an added aspiration to step away from historical architectural styles in order to invent something new and purely functional. It came up at the time of the Age of Enlightenment or Age of Reason, because people became more knowledgeable and aware of the advancements, inventions, discoveries, and improvements of things that were present during these times. Modernist architects believed that they could design a better society by adopting these new changes or things, as well as by implementing solutions to the previous failures of architecture and design in order to meet the basic social needs of the modern period. In other words, modernist architects became more intrigued during these times. And obviously, you can see it from the concrete, glass, and steel which were heavily featured in the buildings that were created during this period. Moving forward, modern architecture is divided into three periods: the early, high, and late. But in this presentation, I'll be only focusing on the two major centuries that cover up the period of modern architecture. So these are 19th century and the 20th century. 19th century is from 1801 to 1900s, while 20th century is from 1901 to 2000. Since the 1920s, the image of architecture has changed dramatically. With the progress of the modern architecture movement, architecture has gradually changed from classical to modern. So 19th century is known as the period of eclecticism. Eclecticism in architecture implies freedom on the part of the architect or client to choose among the styles of the past that seems to him appropriate. It is a 19th century style in which a single piece of work incorporates a mixture of elements from previous historical styles to create something that is new and original. In other words, it is the use of many unrelated different items to form a whole, or the practice of choosing or involving objects, ideas, and beliefs from many different sources. There's two principal characteristics that distinguish 19th century architecture. First, the use of a variety of historical styles. Second, the development of new materials and structural methods. Main types of 19th century architectural styles include Greek Revival, Gothic Revival, Second Empire, Exoticism, Industrial Architecture, and Skyscraper design. Greek Revival was an architectural movement of the late 18th and the early 19th centuries, predominantly in Northern Europe and the United States. It is a product of Hellenism and may be looked upon as the last phase in the development of neoclassical architecture. Gothic Revival, also referred to as Victorian Gothic, New Gothic, or Jigsaw Gothic, is an architectural movement that began in the late 740s in England. Second Empire is an architectural style most popular between 1865 and 1880, so named for the architectural elements in vogue during the era of the Second French Empire. It is a style that evolved from the 17th century Renaissance foundations. It acquired an eclectic mix of earlier European styles, most notably the Baroque, often combined with mansard roofs and low squared base domes. Exoticism is a trend in European art and design, influenced by some ethnic groups or civilizations from the late 19th century. Industrial architecture is the design and construction of buildings serving industry. Such buildings rose in importance with the Industrial Revolution and were some of the pioneering structures of modern architecture. Skyscraper design is a tall, continuously habitable building of over 10 floors, mostly designed for office, commercial, and residential uses. At the beginning of the 20th century, world culture began a period of rapid lifestyle change and growth fueled by the new technological innovations and fast-paced lifestyle created by the Industrial Revolution. For the first time, architects were presented with a new international culture, industry, technology, urbanism, congestion, production, connectivity, and complexity. Classical forms of architecture were unable to cope with the complexities of this new post-urban world and the changes in lifestyle, technology, plumbing, mobility, and the frequent location which would be the hallmarks of the new century. Architects began to wonder how they could incorporate modern ideas about technology and mass production into an architecture that could relate to the new state of the world. So in 20th century, new materials, methods, and practices began to be adopted by architects. Novel forms that chronicle the modern period were also created. Two characteristics of 20th century architecture. Those architectural structures that incorporate architectural styles such as Art Deco, Art Nouveau, Brutalist to Constructivist, Modernist, Structuralist, etc. Sleek, elegant, modern look. Main types of 20th century architectural styles include Constructivism, Bauhaus, International Style, Structuralism, Brutalism, and Minimalism. Constructivism is combined engineering and technology with political ideology. Most features of constructivism include glass and steel, abstract geometric shapes, and technological details such as antennae, signs, and projection screens. Bauhaus, German expression meaning house for building based on functionalism and simplicity. It uses principles of classical architecture in their most pure form, without ornamentation of any kind. Features of Bauhaus buildings include flat roofs, smooth facades, and cubic shapes. Common colors used are white, gray, beige, or black. Floor plans are open and furniture is functional. The International Style, term often used to describe Bauhaus architecture in the United States. It is favored architecture for office buildings and is also found in upscale homes built for the rich. Structuralism, based on the idea that all things are built from a system of signs. These signs are made up of opposites, a process of searching for the relationship between elements. It focuses on the idea that structure is more important than function. Brutalism, rugged reinforced concrete construction or beton brut meaning raw concrete. It is heavy and angular. It is the type of style that can be constructed quickly and economically. Its common features include precast concrete slabs, rough unfinished surfaces, exposed steel beams, and massive sculptural shapes. Last is minimalism. Minimalism is also known as reductivist design, meaning tending to reduce to a minimum or to simplify in an extreme way. Buildings are stripped of all but the most essential elements. With this kind of style, emphasis is placed on the outline or frame of the structure. Interior walls are eliminated and floor plans are open. Lighting is also used to dramatize lines and planes, and the negative spaces around the structure are part of the overall design. These are just a few examples of the 20th century architectural styles, but there's a lot more than this. Next, characteristics of modern architecture. Simplified forms and clean lines. The modern look means simplicity in form and design. Modern architecture is based on abstraction, which is created by clean lines, basic shapes, and forms. Thus, the simple plain geometric forms, linear elements, and rectangular shapes characterize modern architecture. Next, emphasis on rectangular forms and horizontal and vertical lines. Shapes of buildings of modern architecture are based on boxes. Materials are often used in good defined planes, and vertical forms are used to juxtapose against the horizontal elements for lending a dramatic effect. Low horizontal massing, flat roofs, emphasis on horizontal planes, and broad roof overhangs. Flat roofs are used to give more emphasis on horizontal mass. Many buildings of the modern period hug the ground and appear off the ground, not in contrast to it. Next, use of modern building materials and systems. Concrete blocks are used as a finished material. Steel columns are used in exposed applications. Concrete floors are stained and exposed, and long-span steel trusses permit open column-free spaces. Use of traditional materials in new ways. Bricks and stonework are simple and used in rectilinear masses and planes. Modern building materials like wood, brick, and stone are used in simplified ways to reflect modern aesthetics. Emphasis on honesty of materials. In many cases, stained wood is used to express the texture and character. Relationship between interior spaces and sites. Large glass spaces are used to bring the side of building into the building and take advantage of dramatic views and natural landscaping. Living, dining, and kitchen spaces are designed collaboratively as a part of contiguous interior space. Living spaces are not defined by walls or hallways in most cases. Emphasis on open flowing interior spaces. Large glass windows from ceiling to floor are used to introduce natural light deep into the interior and also provide dramatic views. Use of sun and shading to enhance human comfort. Long overhangs and recessed openings provide shading. They are oriented to take advantage of nature's forces and provide solar heating. Elements of modern architecture: proportion, scale, level, facade, and block. Proportion. The design method of modern architecture pursues proportional harmony. Proportion is one of the core elements of modern architectural design methods. Scale. The design method of modern architecture also pursues scale coordination. Coordination of scale is one of the foundations of the aesthetics of architecture. In architecture, the scale of coordination forms a unified rule. Under the constraints of the unified rule, the beauty of architecture forms a coordinated whole. This applies to the modern architectural design methods. Level. The design method of modern architecture also entails ridge levels. Ridge levels of architecture are seen in well-designed modern buildings. When designing a structure, building ridge levels under the constraints of proportion of scale is the most basic design method for architects. Facade and block. Architects are relatively less restricted in their architectural design, and architects can design more freely when it comes to facade. The structural materials of modern architectures are mainly reinforced concrete and steel. When it comes to block, in modern block architectures, the architects use the components that fit the block to enrich the architecture's surface or appearance. Prominent modernist architects. Frank Lloyd Wright, forefather of organic architecture, first became known for his prairie style of architecture. An example of his work is the Falling Water Residence. The Falling Water Residence is considered by some as the most famous private house ever built. Falling Water Residence epitomizes man living in harmony with nature. Mies van der Rohe is widely regarded as one of the pioneering masters of modern architecture. He called his buildings as skin and bones architecture. He is associated with the aphorisms "less is more" and "God is in the details." An example of his work is the Seagram Building. The Seagram Building is a skyscraper in Midtown Manhattan, New York City. The Seagram Building was the most expensive skyscraper of its time. Walter Gropius, German architect, Founder and first director of Bauhaus, a school of design in Germany. An example of his work is the Bauhaus Architecture School. Charles Edward Ginret, better known as Le Corbusier, coined the phrase form follows function, known as the father of modernism and the father of skyscrapers. An example of his work is Chapelle Notre Dame de Haut, a Roman Catholic chapel in France. Louis Henry Sullivan, an American architect, known as father of modernism and the father of skyscrapers, conceived the most famous phrase ever to come out of his profession: form follows function. Sullivan's architecture is a mixture of plain geometry and undisguised massing, punctuated with elaborate pockets of ornamentation in stone, wood, and terracotta. Yao Ming Pei, or I.M. Pei, Chinese-American architect, regarded as the greatest interpreter of international style. An example of his work is the Louvre Pyramid, a large glass and metal pyramid located in Paris. Renzo Piano, an Italian architect, best known for his controversial design of the Senator George Pompidou. An example of his work is the Shard, or the London Bridge Tower. Frank Owen Gehry, a Canadian-American architect, believes that architecture should speak of its time and place but yearn for timelessness. He is known for his bold architectural features and unusual shapes. His designs transcend the ordinary building and are truly monumental works of art. An example of his work is Walt Disney Concert Hall located in downtown Los Angeles, California. Example of structures: Crystal Palace, built in 1851, designed by Joseph Paxton and Owen Jones. Los Manantiales, built in 1958, designed by Felix Candela. Sydney Opera House, built in 1973, designed by John Odson and Karl Langer. Seagram Building, built in 1957, designed by Mies van der Rohe and Philip Johnson. Louvre Pyramid, built in 1989, designed by Yao Ming Pei. Eiffel Tower, built in 1889, designed by Stephen Sovstre, Maurice Coquelin, and Emily Noguer. That's all. Thank you.